thank you everyone for dialing into our session. I'm Noemi, VP Client Success at Mediamath, and joining me today is Kate, COO from SuperAwesome, and Rick, Advertising Operations Manager from Penguin Random House. For those of you who don't know Mediamath, we are a leading DSP, and we set about a couple of years ago to redesign what we believe is a broken supply chain. And we believe it's broken because it's lacked transparency, flexibility, and importantly, there's been a lack of trust. As a result, we've been on a journey to modernize the ecosystem by building a platform, which we've called Source, bound by values, respect for people's data, and a commitment to delivering addressable and accountable advertising to reach real people on real media. And this year, we're pleased to be able to extend our commitment to brands so that they can engage with a younger audience in a brand safe, privacy compliant manner through our partnership with SuperAwesome, the leading kid tech provider. Children's safety in an online advertising has shot up in our industry's agenda over the last couple of years, notably with the arrival of GDPR-K in 2018. With 170,000 kids going online every day for the first time, this target audience, and along with the fact that this target audience is increasingly shunning kind of the more traditional channels such as TV, brands need to feel confident reaching kids in an online environment. So we wanted to use today's session to acknowledge and address some of the challenges that exist when advertising to children, but also demonstrate that it is important and possible to engage with this younger audience. So we're going to kick this session off by sharing with you some insights from one of SuperAwesome's white paper and demonstrating the role that children play in the purchasing funnel. And then we'll move to a Q&A session where we'll bring Rick in from Penguin Random House to talk a little bit about Penguin's experience when it comes to advertising with kids. So Kate, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Noemi. I'm very excited to be here today talking to this forum. As a former Mediamather back in the days when programmatic really wasn't the word, back in the over a decade ago, it's really exciting to come together now that I'm in kid tech and come back with Mediamath to offer such a cool and revolutionary and transparent way to connect with all audiences on the internet. And when we say all audiences, we really do mean it has to be inclusive of kids, because as Noemi was saying, there's such a gigantic part of digital users today. For young teens and for kids, they represent a gigantic opportunity for embracing digital natives, but also very influential and powerful part of the ecosystem. If you ask a parent, or if you're a parent yourself, or you're an aunt and uncle, you know how much influence a kid has in your household. You know how many decisions they can impact every day. And parent surveys agree. 87% of them say, yeah, my child's or my young teen's opinion counts. And it counts for not just what toys come into the house or what movies you're going to watch as a family, and when theaters come back, go to see in the cinema. Kids' influence spans many, many verticals. And this is especially true when you think about young teens and kids who are tweens. They impact not just kind of the obvious verticals, they impact clothing, footwear, electronics, right? It's a kid who's going to decide if their home is going to be an Xbox home or a PlayStation home. It might be mom and dad who are the shopper, but it's actually the kid, the consumer, who's the one who influences decisions. So historically, when kids and young teens have been excluded from advertising, content, really cool, rich experiences, maybe games, or even what's streamed on OTT, it's a real missed opportunity, because this is an audience that directs billions of dollars of consumption and purchase around the world. It's especially true coming into the holidays, right? Parents are going to want, especially in a pandemic, to fulfill what they can in a kid's hopes and dreams. So kids, super, super important. But before coming to work at SuperAwesome 3 years ago in kid tech, if you had asked me in my product development role, working in cross-grain identity or working in early days in programmatic, if we could do kids, if we can extend our solutions, our early programmatic solutions to kids, I would have run screaming out of the room. And you've probably been in that situation too, of like, yeah, kids, but we get it, they're important, but how will we even do this? Are there rules? Can we even advertise to kids? And the short answer is yes, you can, and yes, you should. But you need to think about and make sure that when you go on this endeavor to engage kids and young teens, that you have a solution or you're thinking about your strategy for compliance and responsibility. When it comes to compliance, as Noemi said, we have to think about data collection and data usage as required by the GDPR, the kids part of GDPR, and COPPA, the rules in the US, because they provide the framework for what can you collect and use for kids, not just in those countries, but they're basically the baseline rules for countries around the world. And these are the rules that say, can you collect and use kids data? And when we say kids data, the definition of kids personal information is quite wider than that for adults. We're talking about full IP addresses, cookies, mobile identifiers, lat long, even voices and videos of kids are considered personal information. So when you're thinking about connecting with this big and powerful audience, you really have to have a strategy that says, can we collect and use this kids data? Have we gotten parental consent to do so? And if not, let's instead try a contextual approach, an approach that is zero data. That's usually what we need to do as marketers, is not use any kids data, because the bar for collecting parental consent is super, super high. But it's not just about data collection and data usage. We also have to make sure that our strategies are formed around what's appropriate and responsible for a young teen or kid to see, hear, feel in ads and content. And so when we think about our strategies, we also have to pay attention to new laws like the Age Appropriate Design Code that's in the UK, or the KRU standard that's in the US, that kind of remind us we have to make sure that we're encouraging kids to have good behaviors in the content and ads that they're seeing. And I just want to say too that the momentum for us having to care and think about a compliance strategy, think about responsibility, isn't just those verticals that are obvious for young kids. They have affected so many different verticals, not just because we know how kids influence electronics and clothing, like I said before, but also because the age of a child has gone up. It used to be federally here in the US, it was just people under 13, but now thanks to the GDPRK and the new protections in California, 16-year-olds are who we have to think about when we're thinking about compliant and safe interaction. So the TLDR here is, yes, you can advertise to kids. You just have to make sure you're doing it with privacy by design and responsibility by design as a foundation. And there's been a lot of companies who didn't come up with their compliance strategy before they engaged these audiences or before they built their platforms. There have been some missteps, and there have been some pretty costly headlines accrued by TikTok and Google with the YouTube lawsuit in the US last year, or how Oath misstepped and they didn't make sure that they were preventing kids' data leakage in ad transactions. But that's what we're here to talk about today, is that with the advancements of kid tech and in partnerships like ours with Mediamath, you can confidently and safely engage kids, because it's our platforms, our technologies that are helping you make sure that you're doing it in compliant with data privacy law and with appropriateness and safety in mind. So yes, you can advertise to kids, and yes, you should, because they're really large and important and powerful, kids and young teens too. And so, it's important when you think about what kids are doing online, we need to be able to ensure we find them and can find them and reach them across all channels. Kids are definitely the ones who are spending most time on phones and tablets and streaming their content. If you ask a kid today, do you watch TV? They say, yeah, of course, but they don't mean linear old television. They mean they watch Netflix, they watch OTT apps, they watch it through on-demand live, or not linear. So when we think about connecting with kids, you have to think about how we're going to reach them across all of these fragmented devices. And that's definitely something that we want to help the ecosystem understand is what are kids doing online, because they're often the canary in the coal mine of what's going to be cool, what's going to trend. They're the ones that tell us first. So that's what we're here to do, is not just make sure that we're compliance and safety are top of mind, but we're also finding kids where they're hanging out and where it's going to work the best to engage them without belying any of their privacy rights. So omnichannel is definitely the way to go to reach young kids and teens across all different formats. So that was some context that we wanted to give you about the kids ecosystem and the kids landscape. Noemi, I think we're going to have a conversation now.
Yes, thank you, Kate. Sorry, just need to unmute. So let's bring Rick in from Penguin Random House. So Rick, thank you for taking the time out of your holiday to join us today. Much appreciated.
Having me.
Penguin Random House is one of the brands who have embraced kids advertising online. Before we kind of go into the details, could you maybe start by introducing yourself and giving us some insight into your role at Penguin Random House?
Sure. So as it was mentioned, I'm an ad operations manager at Penguin Random House, specifically supporting Penguin Random House US. And what our team does is we provide programmatic advertising support to all of our US publishing divisions with the primary goal of running campaigns that drive book sales. While we do have other goals, this right now is the current priority for our organization, which, you know, for us, the way we see programmatic fitting in, the way we try to strategize around that in driving sales, not only through penguinrandomhouse.com, but also through our various retailers like Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Cool. And so what made you guys sort of decide to take the plunge in terms of actually engaging with kids online rather than kind of shying away from it and thinking maybe it's not worth taking the risk?
Yeah, so, you know, when we started working with Mediamath, specifically working with our children's publishing divisions, you know, we were kind of looking for new ideas in which to, in new places where we could advertise our books. And, you know, from what was mentioned in the presentation by Kate, you know, COPA has proven to be a bit of a challenge in terms of identifying audiences and inventory that you can target through advertising. And I think in the past, we've often shied away from advertising directly to kids because of that, but also because, you know, there are other tangential audiences that we've focused on, specifically parents, teachers, librarians, other people that might influence what kids read. But I think this year, more so than previous years, we've kind of realized what Kate had mentioned in that, you know, as much as those audiences are the purchasers or high-level influencers, kids are just as much of an influencer in what gets bought within a household. So when the option of SuperAwesome was presented to us by our account team, you know, I had immediate interest, and in sharing it with our children's teams, they had immediate interest as well. And that's kind of what sparked us to go down that path. And the results we've gotten so far have been good, and we've been happy with them. And I think, you know, there's definitely more room for us to move on going forward with that. Nice.
And Kate, just to bring you back into the conversation. So both COPA in the US, but also GDPR-K talk about shared responsibility in the ecosystem. Can you expand a bit more on how brands should be thinking about this concept and making sure that they're, you know, adhering to it?
Yeah, so, you know, maybe historically the onus of keeping kids safe was maybe overemphasized for a publisher of a website, right? If a kid comes to a website to play a game or to watch a video or do something, it's always been very clear that the publisher had to make sure that on their website or in their game, they weren't collecting any data from kids. But as we've seen over time, that their ability to make sure that there isn't any data leaking off of their experience also has to include the fact that the ads coming to the page shouldn't be trying to grab that data or use it for targeting, use it for measurement, use it for unconsented purposes. And so the responsibility for keeping a kid safe has gone from not just the publisher, but sort of upstream to the advertiser, and then all of us suppliers in the middle. If you are intending to reach a child, if you are intending to create great content or be involved in experience for a kid, then you do have a shared responsibility to ensure that you are not inappropriately, incorrectly collecting and using a kid's piece of information. And that's what we saw in the oath case, is that steps in the supply chain between a publisher and an advertiser were called out in a lawsuit because they were mishandling data that was being transferred along an ad transaction. And that's a really good precedent for how we all have to care about each of our responsibilities in the chain. And, frankly, from a brand's perspective and the agency's perspective, they often have a lot to lose if their brand shows up in a negative headline. Maybe they didn't necessarily mean to collect or incorrectly use kids' information, but if a consumer realizes that it was a brand involved in the transaction, it's the consumer that's going to know that household name, and that's the household name that's going to be appearing in a negative headline, which can be very costly to a brand. So it's the responsibility of the brand and the agency having full understanding and having full transparency about how data is collected and used alongside the supply chain is everyone's responsibility for sure.
And kind of a quick fire question. Do you think that the big social platforms that you mentioned, so the YouTubes and the TikToks, do you think they've made sufficient progress to ensure child safety? Or do you think they're sort of on a journey to solving it, or they haven't even begun to take the necessary steps that they need to?
They've been made to start because of some of the inquiries and settlements that have been brought by regulators. But in my opinion, their journey has just been begun, because a lot of their reaction still is to expunge kids from their audiences to try to keep kids out. And what we see is that a better approach is to allow kids in, but maybe under a modified service, or just acknowledge what parts of the service are appropriate for them or are allowed by a parent. Our belief is that really, if we're going to make the internet safer for kids, if we're going to all, have healthy relationships with consumers and shoppers and brands and everybody in between, that we can't ignore or avoid this audience. We have to welcome them in. We have to say yes to kids and figure out a way to have a healthy relationship. So those platforms aren't quite there yet. Most of them are trying to push them away. I think we'll get there when they figure out a way to include them, be inclusive. They're not there yet.
Nice. And Rick, could you talk a bit more about the tactics that you've used to engage with this younger audience? And, feel free to talk beyond just the Mediamath and SuperAwesome partnership. Interested to hear how you guys go about thinking, smart ways to engage with this younger audience in the online world.
Sure. The way we view sort of advertising and marketing in general to a kid audience, we look at it as we're trying to build lifelong readers. We want to make sure that from a young age, we're engaging with the audience and kind of cultivating them along the way to always being a reader. And among the tactics that we use, aside from what I've mentioned earlier, where we do a lot of outreach to teachers and librarians and a lot of marketing events that way, we reach out to parents quite often. And through, when we're targeting kids, what we've been focusing a lot on lately is more of those awareness tactics. How do we advertise via CTV and OTT, since that's sort of ballooned among this COVID-19 pandemic? We see that as high value, and it's more about just building that awareness, whether it's for a specific book, whether it's for a book series that a kid can read multiple books within, or for specific authors in some cases, like Dr. Seuss, where we try to really just make sure that we're communicating clearly, what it is that is available to all the touch points within that audience, whether it's from kids all the way up to parents, teachers, and librarians.
Rick, at that point on the lifetime, making the consumer a lifelong reader speaks to what we hear all the time about lifetime value of a consumer starting at very young ages. You know, if you think about, you know, a footwear brand, you know, you kind of decide, are you an Adidas kid or a Nike kid when you are a tween and teen? You decide what deodorant you're going to wear. You decide which football team you're gonna be most loyal to. All of these things in the lifetime value get set very early, and that's what we hear all the time on the value of reaching young teens and kids too.
Great. So I'm just conscious that we are at time today. So perhaps I'll wrap up with a couple of key takeaways. So firstly, brand loyalty and brand preference are formed at a young age. So it is important for brands and not just toy manufacturers to be engaging with kids. Kids are very digital savvy. So if you want to be engaging with them in a meaningful way, you're going to need to be leveraging digital channels. And the good news is it is possible to engage with this younger audience in a digital environment in a privacy compliant manner, thanks to partnerships such as Mediamath and SuperAwesomes. If you have any questions, if you'd like to find out more about our partnership and how you can reach out to the younger audience, especially at this time of year when you've got Black Friday and Christmas coming up, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's an email address on the screen, programmaticpioneers@mediamath.com. Kate and Rick, thank you very much for your time today, and a big thank you to Programmatic Pioneers for giving this opportunity to talk about our partnership.